Settle in and let your thoughts drift as we travel far back into the quiet, misty past of ancient Italy. Long before great armies marching roads of stone or towering monuments, Rome was only a calm stretch of hills, rivers, and wooden huts. In this chapter, the birth of Rome emerges softly through myths, kings, and rituals told in a steady, unhurried way. If you genuinely like this kind of calm storytelling, please like and subscribe, and simply enjoy the history as it gently unfolds. Once upon a time, long before smartphones, cars, or even written books as we know them, in the rolling, misty hills of central Italy, there lay a fertile land called Latium. This was a place of lush green valleys, sparkling rivers, and ancient forests where wild animals roamed and early tribes scratched out a living from the soil. The people here were simple farmers and shepherds, living in small villages built from wood and mud, trading goods like olive oil, wine, and wool. They spoke a language that would evolve into Latin, the tongue that would one day echo across empires. But in this humble setting, around the year 753 BC or so, the legends tell us the greatest story of all began: the birth of Rome. The tale starts with a twist of fate and a touch of the divine, as most great legends do. In the nearby city of Alba Longa, ruled by a line of kings descended from the Trojan hero Aeneas, more on him later, there lived a beautiful princess named Rhea Silvia. She was no ordinary royal. She was a Vestal virgin, sworn to serve the goddess Vesta by keeping the sacred fire burning and staying pure, never marrying or having children. But the gods had other ideas. According to the myth, Mars, the fierce god of war himself, tall, armored, and unstoppable, fell in love with her. In a whirlwind romance straight out of a fairy tale or a godly drama, he became the father of her twin sons, Romulus and Remus. Now here's where things get villainous. Rhea Silvia's uncle, King Amulius, had stolen the throne from his brother Numitor, Rhea's father. Amulius was a paranoid tyrant, always fearing someone would take his power. When he heard about the twins, he saw them as a threat. Prophecies whispered that they would grow up to overthrow him. So, in a cruel act, he ordered the Bobbies to be drowned in the Tiber River, that wide, winding waterway that snaked through Latium like a silvery serpent. The servants, perhaps with heavy hearts, placed the infants in a basket and set it adrift on the swirling currents, expecting the river's floods to do the dirty work. But fate, or maybe the gods watching from Mount Olympus, intervened. The basket didn't sink. Instead, it floated gently downstream, carried by the gentle waves until it washed up on the muddy banks near the foot of the Palatine Hill. This hill, one of 7 that would become the heart of Rome, was a wild spot back then, covered in thick woods and home to wolves, boars, and birds. And it was here that the most famous part of the legend unfolds. A she-wolf, fierce and protective, discovered the crying Bobbies. Instead of attacking, she took pity on them, or perhaps Mars guided her. She nursed them with her own milk, licking their tiny faces clean and keeping them warm in her den. This image, the Capitoline wolf suckling the twins, became Rome's eternal symbol, carved in bronze statues that still stand today, reminding everyone of the city's wild, miraculous origins. The wolf couldn't raise them forever, though. Enter Faustulus, a kind-hearted shepherd who lived nearby with his wife, Acca Larentia. While tending his flocks along the river, he stumbled upon the scene: 2 baby boys, healthy and strong, guarded by the she-wolf. Amazed and moved, he scooped them up and brought them home. Acca, who had longed for children, welcomed them as her own. The couple raised Romulus and Remus in their simple hut, teaching them to herd sheep, hunt in the forests, and fight off bandits. The boys grew tall and brave, with the strength of warriors and the cunning of survivors. They didn't know their royal blood yet, but they led bands of young shepherds, protecting the weak and raiding those who wronged them. They were like the Robin Hoods of ancient Italy, popular heroes among the common folk. As teenagers, the truth came out in a burst of adventure. During a festival, Remus got into a scuffle with some of King Amulius's men and was captured. Romulus, ever the loyal brother, rallied his friends and rescued him. In the chaos, they learned from their grandfather Numitor, who had been imprisoned by Amulius, about their true heritage. They were princes, sons of a god, destined for greatness. Fired up with righteous anger, the twins stormed Alba Longa. With the help of Numitor's supporters, they overthrew the wicked Amulius, slaying him and restoring Numitor to the throne. The city cheered justice had been served. But Romulus and Remus weren't content to stay in Alba Longa. They dreamed of building their own city, a fresh start on the very spot where the She-Wolf had saved them, the Palatine Hill. It was a perfect location, high ground for defense, close to the Tiber for water and trade, and fertile land all around. They began planning, but sibling rivalry reared its ugly head. Romulus favored the Palatine, while Remus preferred the nearby Aventine Hill. To settle it, they turned to the gods, watching for omens in the flight of birds, a common Roman practice called augury. Remus saw 6 vultures first, but Romulus claimed 12, a sign of divine favor. Tensions boiled over. As Romulus started plowing a furrow to mark the city's boundaries, a sacred ritual, Remus mocked him by jumping over the ditch, saying it was no real wall. In a fit of rage, Romulus struck his brother with a shovel, or perhaps in a fight, and Remus fell dead. "So perish all who cross my walls," Romulus supposedly declared, though he later regretted it deeply, burying Remus with honors on the Aventine. Heartbroken but determined, Romulus pressed on. He named the city Roma after himself and became its first king. This tragic founding myth captured the Roman spirit: ambition, fratricide, and unyielding drive. Historians today debate if it really happened. Archaeology shows settlements on the Palatine around 1000 BC, but the story was likely embroidered by later writers like Livy to glorify Rome's origins. Now a king needs subjects. Rome started small, just a cluster of thatched huts on the hill, surrounded by a simple wall of earth and wood. To populate it, Romulus opened the gates wide, declaring it an asylum, a safe haven for outlaws, escaped slaves, debtors, and wanderers from all over Italy. "Come one, come all," he proclaimed. Men flocked in, drawn by the promise of a new life free from past troubles. Soon, Rome was a bustling camp of tough, adventurous guys. Think of it as a Wild West town in ancient times, full of exiles forging a community. But there was a big problem. No women without families. The city couldn't grow or last. Romulus tried diplomacy first, asking neighboring tribes like the Sabines for marriages. They refused, seeing the Romans as a bunch of ruffians. So Romulus hatched a sneaky plan. He announced a grand festival in honor of Neptune, with games, feasts, and sacrifices. Tribes from all around, including the Sabines led by King Titus Tatius, came with their families. As the celebrations peaked, Romulus gave a signal. His men rushed in and kidnapped the young Sabine women, about 30, according to some tales, though legends exaggerate it to hundreds. Chaos erupted. The Sabine men fled in shock, vowing revenge. This rape of the Sabine women, rape meaning abduction back then, sparked a war. The Sabines attacked Rome, breaching the walls and nearly winning. But in the heat of battle, the kidnapped women, now Roman wives and mothers, ran between the armies, hair disheveled, bobbies in arms. "Stop," they cried. "If you kill our husbands, you'll widow us. If you kill our fathers, you'll orphan us." Moved by their pleas, the men made peace. Romulus and Tatius even ruled jointly for a time, blending Roman and Sabine customs. This story showed early Rome's mix of brutality and reconciliation, and it explained why many Roman families claimed Sabine roots. Romulus ruled for about 37 years, turning his ragtag settlement into a real kingdom. He organized the people into tribes and curii wards for voting and military service. He created the Senate, a council of 100 elders paters, or fathers from leading families, to advise him. He built the first fortifications, like the Pomerium, a sacred boundary around the city. Laws were simple: honor the gods, respect authority, fight bravely. Romulus led wars against nearby cities like Crustumerium and Fidene, expanding Rome's territory. Religion was key. He established priesthoods and festivals, like the Lupercalia, where young men ran naked through the streets, whipping people for fertility. Weird, but it was a thing. His end was as mysterious as his beginning. One day, during a review of troops on the campus Martius, a sudden storm darkened the sky. Thunder roared, lightning flashed, and when the clouds cleared, Romulus was gone. Some said he was murdered by senators jealous of his power. Others claimed the gods, especially Mars, lifted him to heaven in a chariot, making him the god Quirinus. The Senate proclaimed him divine, and Romans worshipped him ever after. His legacy. Rome's foundation myth, blending heroism, violence, and piety. After Romulus, the throne passed to wiser hands. The Senate chose Numa Pompilius, a Sabine known for his piety and wisdom, as the second king around 715 BC. Numa was the opposite of Romulus, peaceful, not warlike. He focused on building Rome's soul. Legend says he was taught by the nymph Egeria in a sacred grove, gaining divine wisdom. Numa reformed the calendar. The old one had only 10 months starting with March, named for Mars, but he added January for Janus, god of beginnings, and February for purification to make 12, aligning with the moon. Though it was still off 355 days, it was a start. Romans would tweak it later. Numa established religious orders. The Vestal Virgins to guard Vesta's fire if it went out. Bad luck for Rome. Flamens for major gods like Jupiter, and augurs to read omens. He built temples, like one to Janus, with doors open in war and closed in peace. They were rarely closed. Under Numa, Rome enjoyed 43 years of tranquility, growing through alliances rather than conquest. He died around 673 BC, revered as a saintly king who gave Rome its moral compass. Next came Tullus Hostilius, elected around 673 BC, a stark contrast, a hot-headed warrior eager for glory. Rome needs strength, not just prayers, he might have said. He destroyed Alba Longa, Rome's mother city, after a ritual combat where Roman triplets, the Horatii, fought Alban ones, the Curiatii. 2 Horatii died, but the last tricked and slew the 3 Curiatii, winning the day. Tullus razed Alba, moving its people to Rome's Caelian hill, doubling the population. He conquered neighbors like the Veients and built the Curia Hostilia, the first Senate house, a sturdy building for debates. But Tullus neglected religion, and legend says Jupiter struck him with lightning for it. His 32-year reign ended around 641 BC, leaving Rome bigger and bolder. Ancus Marcius, Numa's grandson, took the throne around 641 BC, blending peace and war. He expanded Rome to the sea, founding Ostia at the Tiber's mouth, Rome's first port, vital for salt from nearby marshes and trade. He built the first bridge over the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius, made of wood without metal for religious reasons. Ancus fought the Latins and Sabines, settling conquered people on the Aventine Hill. He strengthened defenses with ditches and walls, and promoted justice with new laws. His 24-year rule ended around 617 BC, with Rome now a coastal power. Then came the Etruscan influence. The Tarquins from the advanced Etruscan city of Tarquinii brought sophistication. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the 5th king around 616 BC, was actually an immigrant named Lucumo, son of a Greek from Corinth. He moved to Rome for opportunity, changed his name, and rose through charm and wealth. Elected king, he drained the marshy valley between hills with the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's first sewer system, an engineering marvel that turned swampland into the Forum Romanum, the bustling public square for markets, speeches, and temples. Priscus built the Circus Maximus, a massive racetrack in the valley for chariot races. Imagine 150,000 spectators cheering as horses thundered around. He increased the Senate to 300, adding Etruscan nobles. He waged wars against Latins and Sabines, tripling Rome's territory. An eagle omen confirmed his rule. It snatched his cap and returned it, symbolizing divine approval. After 38 years, he was assassinated around 579 BC by Ancus's sons, but his legacy was urban growth. Servius Tullius, Priscus's son-in-law or slave-born Persumtales, became king around 578 BC. A reformer, he organized society by wealth, not birth, for fairer taxes and military service. He created the Centuriate Assembly, people divided into 193 centuries based on property rich in heavy armor, poor with slings. This census was revolutionary, giving plebeians a voice. Servius built the Servian Wall, a massive 7-mile circuit of stone and earth around the 7 hills, with gates like the Porta Collina. It protected Rome for centuries. He expanded the city, incorporating the Quirinal, Viminal, and Esquiline hills. Diplomatically, he allied with Latins, building a temple to Diana on the Aventine. His 44-year reign ended tragically around 535 BC, murdered by his son-in-law, the next king. That brings us to Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the Proud, the 7th and last king, around 535 BC. Arrogant and cruel, he seized power by tossing Servius's body into the street of crime. Superbus ruled with an iron fist, executing rivals and forcing labor on grand projects, completing the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a huge structure with terracotta statues, symbolizing Rome's might. He expanded the sewers and forum, but at great cost. Heavy taxes and forced work left people resentful. His foreign policy was aggressive. He conquered Etruscan towns and formed the Latin League under Roman dominance. But tyranny bred rebellion, the spark. His son Sextus raped Lucretia, a virtuous noblewoman married to Collatinus. Lucretia, in despair, summoned her father, husband, and friend Lucius Junius Brutus, told her story, and stabbed herself to preserve her honor. "Avenge me," she gasped. Brutus, pretending to be dim-witted to survive, hence Brutus meaning stupid, revealed his sharp mind. He swore on her bloody dagger to end monarchy. Rallying the people with Lucretia's body in the forum, he denounced the Tarquins. In 509 BC, the assembly voted to exile the king and his family. Superbus tried to return with Etruscan help, but Romans repelled them at battles like the Arsian Wood, where Brutus died heroically. Rome became a republic. No more kings. 2 consuls, elected yearly, shared power. Brutus and Collatinus first. A senate advised, assemblies voted. This system aimed to prevent tyranny with checks like vetoes. During this 244-year monarchy, Rome evolved from a village to a city-state of maybe 20,000 people. They adopted Etruscan tech, arches for buildings, gladiatorial games from funerals and drainage. From Greeks via Etruscans, they got alphabet, art, and gods. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera Juno, Aphrodite Venus. Society stratified. Patricians, descendants of original senators, held power. Plebeians farmed and traded. Slaves wore captives twalled. Women had roles in home and religion, but no vote. Religion wove into life. Household gods, lares, state rituals to appease deities for prosperity. Archaeology backs some Thales Palatine huts from 8th century BC, early walls. But myths, amplified by poets like Virgil linking Rome to Troy's Aeneas, who fled burning Troy, wandered and settled in Latium, served propaganda. Rome was destined for glory. This era set Rome's foundation, resilient, expansive, godly. Little did they know the Republic would propel them to world domination. With the kings gone for good after that dramatic rebellion in 509 BC, Rome stepped into a brand new era, the Republic. No more one guy ruling everything like a bossy parent. Now, power was shared to keep things fair, or at least, that's what they aimed for. At the top were 2 consuls, elected every year by the assembly of citizens. These guys were like copresidents. They led the army, ran the government, and could veto each other's decisions to stop anyone from getting too powerful. The first consuls were Lucius Junius Brutus, the same hero who sparked the revolt, and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, Lucretia's husband. But Collatinus had the bad luck of sharing a last name with the hated Tarquins, so he stepped down soon after, replaced by Publius Valerius Publicola. Publicola was a smart cookie. He passed laws to make sure consuls couldn't execute citizens without an appeal to the people, earning him the nickname Friend of the People. Advising the consuls was the Senate, a group of about 300 wise old patricians, the rich, noble families who'd been around since Romulus's time. These were the big shots, families like the Fabii, Claudii, and Cornelii, who owned huge chunks of land and had fancy ancestors. The Senate didn't make laws, but their advice, called Senatus Consulta, carried a ton of weight. Consuls ignored it at their peril. Then there were the assemblies. The Centuriate Assembly, organized by wealth and military units centuries, voted on big stuff like declaring war or electing consuls. The Tribal Assembly, grouped by where people lived, tribes, handled everyday laws. It was all designed to balance power, but right from the start. Not everyone was thrilled. See, the patricians hogged all the good jobs: consuls, senators, priests. The plebeians, the everyday folks like farmers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen, made up most of Rome's population and did most of the fighting in the army. But they couldn't hold high office or marry into patrician families at first. Plebeians grumbled about unfair debts. If you couldn't pay, patrician lenders could turn you into a slave, and unequal land grabs from wars. Things boiled over in 494 BC during a tough war with the Equi and Volsci tribes. The plebeians, fed up, staged the first big strike. They marched out of Rome en masse, camping on a nearby hill called the Mons Sacer, Sacred Mount. "Know us, know Rome," they basically shouted. Without plebeians to farm, trade, or fight, the city ground to a halt. The patricians panicked and sent Menenius Agrippa, a smooth-talking ex-consul, to negotiate. He told a famous fable. The body Rome rebelled against the stomach patricians, but realized everything starves without it. The plebeians weren't totally buying it, but they got concessions. The patricians agreed to let them elect 2 tribunes of the plebs, special protectors who were sacrosanct, untouchable. Harming one was a curse from the gods. Tribunes could veto any law or action that hurt plebeians, yell auxilium to help someone in trouble, and call their own assembly concilium plebis. The first tribunes were Lucius Sicinius Veludus and Lucius Albinius Paterculus. This was huge, the start of real plebeian power. But that was just round one of what historians call the conflict of the orders, a 200-year tugafor between patricians and plebeians for equality. In 471 BC, another secession happened, maybe on the Aventine Hill this time, leading to the Lex Publilia, which let plebeians elect tribunes without patrician meddling. Around 462 BC, Tribune Gaius Terentilius Harsa pushed for written laws so patricians couldn't twist unwritten customs. After a decade of fights, in 451 BC, a board of 10 men decemviri created the 12 Tables, Rome's first written code, carved on bronze tablets in the Forum. It covered everything: debts, no more random enslavement, trials, family rights, and even if anyone sings evil songs about another, let him be clubbed. Plebeians loved it because it applied to everyone, but patricians still controlled the priesthoods that interpreted omens and laws. More secessions followed. In 449 BC, after the decemviri got tyrannical, one tried to grab a plebeian girl named Virginia, leading to her tragic death to save her honor. Another walkout forced the Valerio-Horatian laws. These made plebeian votes, plebiscites, binding if the Senate approved, and strengthened tribunes' vetoes. By 445 BC, the Lex Canuleia let plebeians marry patricians, no more class barriers in love. But the big breakthrough came in the 370s BC. Tribunes Gaius Licinius Stolo and Lucius Sextius Lateranus went on a veto spree, blocking elections for 5 years until patricians caved. In 367 BC, the Licinio section laws opened one consul spot to plebeians yearly, capped land holdings to stop patrician megafarms, and eased debts. Sextius became the first plebeian consul in 366 BC. They also created new offices: praetors, judges, and curule aediles, city managers, at first patricianally but soon shared. The fight kept going. In 342 BC, during a mutiny in the army, the Lex Genutia banned interest on loans and required one plebeian consul always. By 339 BC, the Lex Publilia from dictator Quintus Publilius Philo reserved one censor spot for plebeians and made plebiscites binding with prior Senate okay. In 312 BC, Censor Appius Claudius Caecus shook things up. He enrolled freed slave sons in the Senate and built public works like the Appian Way. The final showdown. In 287 BC, amid debt crises from wars, plebeians seceded to the Janiculum Hill. Dictator Quintus Hortensius passed the Lex Hortensia. Plebiscites now bound everyone. No Senate nod needed. Boom, plebeians won full equality. A new elite emerged. Nobles mixing old patricians and rich plebeians. But poor folks still struggled. The gap between rich and poor widened. While all this internal drama played out, Rome faced enemies on every side. It was like being the new kid in a tough neighborhood. Right after the Republic started, the exiled Tarquins didn't give up. They plotted with Etruscan kings to come back. The biggest threat, Lars Porsena, the powerful king of Clusium, modern Chiusi, around 508 BC. Porsena marched on Rome with a huge army, aiming to restore Tarquinius Superbus. Rome's defenders scrambled. Legend tells of Horatius Cockles, a one-eyed hero, holding the pond's Sublicious Bridge alone with two buddies at first against the Etruscans. "Back, you tyrants," he yelled, chopping the bridge while arrows flew. As it collapsed, he swam the Tiber in armor, saved by the gods. Then there's Gaius Mucius, a young Roman who sneaked into Porsena's camp to kill him but stabbed the wrong guy, the king's scribe. Captured, Mucius thrust his right hand into a fire to show Roman grit. "Watch how cheaply we hold our bodies," Porsena, impressed, freed him and sent him back with a message of peace. Mucius earned the nickname Scaevola, left-handed. Another tale, Clolia, a brave Roman girl hostage, led a group of maidens swimming the Tiber to escape. Porsena, admiring her courage, let her pick half the hostages to free. She chose the boys, thinking they'd fight better. In the end, Porsena made peace, withdrew, and even gave back lands Rome lost to Veii. Was this real? Some historians think Porsena actually captured Rome briefly, but Roman stories spun it as a win to save face. Either way, Rome stayed independent and kept fighting Etruscans, like the Long War with Veii 406,396 BC. Dictator Marcus Furius Camillus besieged Veii for 10 years, like a mini Troy. They dug a tunnel under the walls, burst in during a festival, and sacked it. Camillus triumphed, bringing home Juno's statue, whispering yes when asked if she wanted to go to Rome. This win doubled Rome's territory and made them players in central Italy. But the biggest shock came from the north. The Gauls, wild Celtic warriors from what we call France and northern Italy. Around 390 BC, some say 387 BC, a tribe called the Senons, led by chieftain Brennus, invaded Etruria after a beef with Clusium. Romans sent ambassadors, the Fabii brothers, to help Clusium, but one killed a Gaul chief in battle, breaking neutral rules. The Gauls demanded justice. Rome's Senate voted no and even promoted the Fabii. Furious, Brennus marched 3,070,000 warriors south, yelling war cries and waving huge swords. Rome scrambled 6 legions, about 24,000 men, but many green recruits under Tribune Quintus Sulpicius. They met at the Allia River, 11 miles north of Rome. The Romans spread thin to match the Gauls' wide front, but Brennus hit their weak right flank hard. Panic hit. The left wing drowned in the Tiber trying to flee. The right bolted to Rome or Veii. Thousands died, Rome's worst defeat yet. The Gauls, surprised at the easy win, looted bodies before marching on. They reached Rome at dusk, finding gates open and streets empty. Suspicious of a trap, they camped outside. Inside, survivors fortified the Capitoline Hill with food, treasures, and the Vestal Virgin's sacred fire. Elderly patricians stayed in their homes, dressed in finery, sitting like statues. When Gauls entered, they poked one Marcus Papirius. He whacked back with his staff, sparking a massacre. The city burned for days, but the capital held. Gauls foraged, but suffered malaria and famine from the heat and ashes. One night, Gauls sneaked up the cliff using vines. Guards slept, but Juno's sacred geese honked wildly. Marcus Manlius Capitolinus woke, grabbed a shield, and shoved the first Gaul off the edge. Others joined. the invaders tumbled down. The geese saved Rome became legend. After 7 months, both sides were wrecked. Romans offered 1,000 pounds of gold to leave. During weighing, Brennus tossed his sword on the scales. Vi victis, woe to the conquered. But just then, Camillus, exiled earlier but recalled as dictator, burst in with troops from Veii and Ardea. Not with gold, but iron he roared, annulling the deal. In a final battle near the Via Gabina, Romans slaughtered the Gauls. Brennus fled. Rome was saved. The sack was a wake-up call. Rome rebuilt fast walls, temples but haphazardly, explaining the city's twisty streets. They honored heroes, statues for Camillus' second founder, funds for Manlius, who later got executed for plotting. Fear of Gauls lingered. Romans banned Celtic settlements nearby and sacrificed pears to avert Gallic panic in tough times. But they bounced back stronger, turning north to conquer Etruscans like at Sutrium 389 BC and south against Latins. Speaking of south, the toughest foes were the Samnites, tough hill folk from the Apennines, organized in a loose league of tribes like Pentri and Herpini. They wore short tunics, bronze belts, and fought with javelins and shields. Rome clashed with them in 3 brutal wars from 343 to 290 BC, like a gritty mountain feud. The First Samnite War, 343,341 BC, kicked off when Samnites eyed rich Campania. The city of Capua begged Rome for help, even dedicating themselves a fancy way to ally. Consuls Marcus Valerius Corvus and Aulus Cornelius Cassus led the charge. At Mount Gorus near Cumae, Valerius's legions charged uphill at dusk, routing Samnites in hand-to-hand chaos. Cassus nearly got trapped in a pass near Saticula, but Tribune Publius Decius Mus seized a hill, distracting enemies for a night escape and counterattack. At Susula, Valerius burned the Samnite camp. Both consuls triumphed in Rome, but in 341 BC, the Latins rebelled Latin War, forcing Rome to peace with Samnites. They kept Campania, a huge win for trade and troops. Peace didn't last. In 328 BC, Rome founded a colony at Fregellae on Samnite-claimed land. The Second Samnite War, 326,304 BC, exploded. Romans took Naples after a siege 326 BC, allying with Lucanians and Apulians. But disaster struck in 321 BC at the Caudine Forks. Consuls Spurius Postumius and Titus Veturius led legions into a trap by Samnite chief Gaius Pontius. Blocked passes, no water, they surrendered, passing under a yoke of spears in humiliation. Rome rejected the peace, fighting on. In 320 BC, they retook Luceria, freeing hostages. Battles raged. At Lochlea 316 BC, Romans lost big. But in 310 BC, they crushed Etruscans who joined Samnites at Lake Vadimo. Etruscans, Umbrians, even Marsi piled on, but Romans held. In 305 BC, at Bovianum's Samnite capital, consuls Tiberius Minucius and Lucius Postumius smashed the enemy. Peace in 304 BC. Samnites kept independence but lost land. Rome added colonies like Interamna and Carsuli and beat the Equi too. The Third Samnite War, 298,290 BC, was the knockout. Samnites invaded Lucania. Rome allied with Lucanians. Consuls Lucius Scipio Barbatus and Gnaeus Fulvius won early at Bovianum. In 295 BC, the mega-battle of Sentinum, Samnites, Gauls, Etruscans, Umbrians fielded 50,000 plus versus Romans, 40,000 under Fabius Rullianus and Publius Decius Mus. Gauls charged with chariots. Decius devoted himself a ritual suicide charge to inspire victory. Romans won, killing 25,000. In 293 BC at Aquilonia, consul Lucius Papirius Cursor ambushed elite Samnite Linen Legion vowed to gods in white. Final mops in 290 BC by Manius Curius Dentatus. Samnites became allies, paying tribute. Rome took Sabine and Praeduta lands too. These wars, brutal guerrilla stuff in hills, ambushes, sieges. Rome won by building roads like the Appian Way 312 BC by Appius Claudius Caecus 132 miles to Capua, stone-paved for quick troops. They ditched rigid Greek phalanxes for flexible legions, 40,006,000 men in maniples 120-man units. Front, young Hastati with javelins Pila and swords Gladius, throwing volleys then charging. Middle, Principes, prime fighters. Back, Triarii veterans, kneeling with spears as last resort. It has come to the Triarii meant desperate times. Light velites skirmished ahead, cavalry equites flanked. Unlike phalanxes locked shields, maniples could maneuver on rough ground, rotate lines for fresh troops. By 264 BC, Rome bossed most of Italy south of the Po River from Etruria to Campania, Apulia to Lucania. How? Smart diplomacy, divide and conquer. Conquered folks got tiers of rights. Some like Latins full citizenship, vote, marry Romans, trade. Others civitas signed suffragio rights but no vote, still paid taxes and served in army. Tribes like Marsi became socii allies, supplying troops for half Rome's forces. Rome planted colonies, veteran settlements like Beneventum 268 BC to Romanize areas, build loyalty. No heavy tribute, instead shared war loot kept allies happy. The army, citizen soldiers, farmers called up for campaigns up to 16 years max, fighting for glory, land, and booty, then home to plow. But as wars dragged, this strained small farms. Life in the early republic, bustling and tough. Most Romans were farmers on small plots, growing wheat, barley, olives, grape staples like pools, porridge, and wine mixed with water. Big patrician estates latifundia used slaves from wars. Trade picked up. Grain from Sicily, metals from Etruria, luxury stuff from Carthage across the sea. Ports like Ostia hummed with ships. Women ran homes, spun wool in the atrium showing virtue, and had more freedom than Greek ladies. They owned property, divorced, and attended games. No vote, but influential moms like Veturia, who shamed her son Coriolanus from attacking Rome, shaped politics. Religion wove everything. State gods like Jupiter, kingly thunder, Mars, war, Juno, marriage. Priests, flamens, augurs, red bird flights for omens before battles or laws. Festivals galore. Lupercalia, naked runners whipping for fertility, Saturnalia, December partying. Entertainment. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus, up to 150,000 fans, gladiator fights from Etruscan funerals, theater comedies by Plautus like The Pot of Gold, full of slaves outsmarting masters. But inequality festered. Rich senators grabbed war lands, poor plebeians lost farms to debts, swelling Rome's urban crowds. Slaves twalled, freed one's liberty became clients to patrons. This era forged Rome's grit, from a sacked city to Italian overlord. Wars built the army, reforms the society, but cracks showed wealth gaps, over-reliance on conquest. Now the stage was set for Rome's greatest test, yet a clash that would last over a century and reshape the ancient world. Enter Carthage, Rome's most formidable rival. Founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers from Tyre in modern Lebanon, Carthage was a bustling trading powerhouse on the North African coast near today's Tunis. The name Punic comes from Phoenician, and these people were master sailors, merchants, and empire builders. By the 3rd century BC, Carthage controlled a vast maritime empire. The island of Sicily, at least the western part, Sardinia, Corsica, parts of North Africa, and the rich silver mines of Spain, Iberia. Their navy was legendary, hundreds of sleek quinquiremes, 5-oared warships crewed by expert Phoenician sailors. Generals like the Barca family led fearsome armies of mercenaries, Numidian cavalry from Africa, Iberian infantry, Gallic warriors, and even war elephants from the forests south of the Sahara. Carthage was rich, cosmopolitan, and proud, with a government run by merchant oligarchs and a powerful council. Rome and Carthage had coexisted peacefully for centuries, trading and respecting spheres. But as Rome gobbled up southern Italy after the Samnite Wars, their interests collided over Sicily, the fertile island right between them. In 264 BC, a messy local dispute in Messina, where Campanian mercenaries called Mamertines seized the city, sparked the First Punic War 264,241 BC. The Mamertines first asked Carthage for help, then switched to Rome when Carthage sent troops. Rome, seeing a chance to expand and block a rival, sent an army across the Strait of Messina. War was on. Rome was a land power. Carthage ruled the seas. At first, Carthage dominated, winning naval skirmishes like the Battle of the Lipari Islands 260 BC, where they trapped Roman ships. But the Romans, stubborn and inventive, refused to quit. They captured a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme, reverse-engineered it, and in just 60 days built over 100 copies to counter superior Carthaginian seamanship. They invented the Corvus A spiked boarding bridge like a giant crow's beak hinged to the prow, dropped onto enemy ships to lock them in place, turning sea battles into Roman-style infantry fights. The Corvus shone at the Battle of Mylae 260 BC, where Consul Gaius Duilius captured dozens of Punic ships. Victories followed at Sulci 258 BC and Ecnomus 256 BC, where Rome's fleet of 330 ships smashed 350 Carthaginian ones. Emboldened, Rome even invaded Africa in 256 BC under Regulus, but Carthage hired the Spartan mercenary Xanthippus, who crushed the Romans at Tunis 255 BC, capturing Regulus, who was later tortured to death after a failed prisoner exchange. The war dragged on with brutal attrition. Storms sank fleets. Rome lost over 600 ships total to weather and battle, and Sicily became a grinding siege zone. Key land battles included Acragas 262 BC and Panormus 250 BC. Finally, in 241 BC, Consul Gaius Lutatius Catulus built a new fleet and won the decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands. Carthage, exhausted and bankrupt, sued for peace. They gave up Sicily, first Roman province, paid a huge indemnity 3,200 talents of silver, and evacuated Sardinia, which Rome grabbed later anyway. The peace was uneasy. In 218 BC, the spark for the Second Punic War 218,201 BC came from Spain. Carthage, rebuilt under the Barca family Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's dad, conquered Iberian lands, then his son-in-law Hasdrubal, and finally young Hannibal Barca, born 247 BC. As a boy, Hannibal swore eternal hatred for Rome on his father's altar. When Hasdrubal was assassinated 221 BC, Hannibal took command. He besieged Saguntum, a Roman ally in Spain, in 219 BC. Rome demanded he stop. He refused. War. Hannibal's masterstroke. Instead of waiting for Rome to invade, he went on the offensive. In spring 218 BC, he marched from New Carthage Cartagena with 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. He crossed the Pyrenees, fought Gauls, then tackled the Alps, a nightmare of snow, narrow paths, hostile tribes, and cliffs. He lost half his army and most elephants, but emerged in Italy with men a shock to Rome. Hannibal rampaged through Italy. At the Trebia River 218 BC, he ambushed Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, luring Romans across icy water, then hitting with hidden troops and elephants 20,000 plus Romans dead. August 216 BC in Apulia, Consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro fielded men against Hannibal's. Hannibal used brilliant tactics. Weak center Iberians Gauls bowed in, drawing Romans in, while strong wings African infantry enveloped, and Numidian Hispanic cavalry crushed the flanks. Double envelopment Romans trapped, 5,070,000 killed in one day, Rome's worst defeat ever. Panic gripped Rome. People feared Hannibal would march on the city, but he didn't. He lacked siege gear and hoped allies would defect. Instead, the Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius used Fabian tactics: delay, harass supplies, avoid pitched battles. Romans called him Cunctator the Delayer, but it worked. Meanwhile, young Publius Cornelius Scipio, later Africanus, took command in Spain 211,206 BC. He captured New Carthage 209 BC, defeated Hannibal's brothers Hasdrubal and Mago, and cleared Spain by 206 BC. In 204 BC, Scipio invaded Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal. The showdown, Battle of Zama 202 BC. Hannibal had men and 80 elephants, Scipio plus Numidian king Massinissa's cavalry. Scipio arranged lines to channel charging elephants opening lanes, then javelins panicked them back into Carthaginians. Roman cavalry routed Punic horse, then returned to smash Hannibal's rear. Hannibal's veterans fought hard but lost, dead versus ~1, 500 Roman. Carthage surrendered, lost Spain navy, paid 10,000 talents, and Massinissa took Numidian lands. Third Punic War 149,146 BC was pure revenge. Carthage recovered economically, but Rome feared resurgence. Old Senator Marcus Porcius Cato the Elder ended every speech with Ceterum censeo Carthaginem esse delendum. Moreover, I think Carthage must be destroyed. When Carthage defended against Numidian raids violating treaty, Rome declared war in 149 BC. Carthage begged peace, disarming and giving hostages. Rome demanded they abandon the city and move inland. Impossible, so they rebuilt weapons in secret. Consul Manius Manilius besieged Carthage for 3 years. In 146 BC, Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of Africanus, took command. He built a massive mole to block the harbor, starved the city, then stormed it. Street-by-street fighting lasted days. Houses burned. Defenders leaped from roofs. 50,000 survivors enslaved. The city razed, ground plowed, and legend says salted so nothing grew. These wars made Rome supreme in the western Mediterranean. Provinces in Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Spain, Africa. Floods of wealth, gold, slaves, hundreds of thousands, grain, silver mines. But shadows loomed. Small farmers ruined by long wars lost land to senators' Slaveran estates. Generals like Scipio became heroes bigger than the Senate. Inequality grew, and the seeds of civil strife were sown. The Punic Wars turned Rome from Italian power to Mediterranean empire, but at a terrible cost. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BC marked the end of Rome's greatest external threat and the beginning of its most dangerous internal one. Victory had brought unimaginable wealth to the Republic. Shiploads of gold and silver from Carthage and Greece, vast estates in Spain and Africa, hundreds of thousands of war captives turned into slaves, and endless tribute pouring into the treasury. Rome had become the undisputed master of the western Mediterranean, and soon the eastern one too. But this sudden flood of riches poisoned the very roots of the society that had won it. The old Roman ideal of the sturdy, independent citizen farmer began to crumble. During the long wars, many small farmers had been away from their fields for years. While they were fighting in Sicily, Spain, or Africa, their farms fell into debt, were seized by creditors, or were simply abandoned. Wealthy senators and equites, the new business class, bought up these small holdings at bargain prices and turned them into enormous estates called latifundia, broad lands. These giant farms were worked by gangs of cheap or free slave labor captured in the wars. A single latifundium could stretch for miles, producing olive oil, wine, grain, and livestock on an industrial scale. The profits were enormous, but the social cost was catastrophic. Displaced small farmers flooded into Rome looking for work. The city swelled with a new urban poor, landless, jobless, and increasingly angry. They crowded into rickety tenement blocks insulae that rose 4, 5, even 6 stories high, built of cheap wood and brick. Fires, collapses, and disease were constant threats. To keep this restless mob from rioting, the state began distributing free or heavily subsidized grain, the famous bread, part of bread in circuses. But handouts only treated the symptom, not the disease. The Republic's political system, designed for a small city-state of citizen soldiers, was now trying to govern a sprawling empire and a capital of perhaps 7,500,000,000,000 people. The strain was unbearable. Into this crisis stepped the first great reformers, the brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus Tribune, 133 BC, was a patrician by birth but a populist by conviction. He looked at the census rolls and saw the alarming decline in the number of citizens who owned enough property to qualify for legionary service. If the citizen body kept shrinking, Rome would eventually be unable to field an army. His solution was simple and radical. Enforce the old Licinian section law of 367 BC that limited how much public land ager publicus any individual could hold, and redistribute the excess to poor citizens in small plots of about 30 eugera, roughly 18 acres. Tiberius introduced his land bill in 133 BC. The reaction from the Senate, most of whose members were major landowners, was fury. When Tiberius bypassed the Senate and took his bill directly to the tribal assembly, a legally permissible but provocative move, the nobles accused him of aiming at kingship. When his term as tribune was about to end, and he feared prosecution, he ran for re-election, another shocking breach of custom. On the day of the election, a riot broke out. The elderly Pontifex Maximus Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica led a mob of senators and their clients into the Temple of Jupiter, where the assembly was meeting. Armed with clubs and chair legs, they beat Tiberius and hundreds of his supporters to death. His body was thrown into the Tiber. It was the first time since the expulsion of the kings that Roman blood had been shed in the Forum for political reasons. The Republic had crossed a terrible line. 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother Gaius Gracchus Tribune, 123 and 122 BC, returned with even bolder plans. Gaius was more charismatic, more politically skillful, and more dangerous to the Senate. He revived the Land Commission, founded new colonies including one on the site of destroyed Carthage called Junonia, and most importantly introduced a grain law that guaranteed every citizen in Rome a monthly ration of grain at a fixed low price. This made him wildly popular with the urban plebs. He also tried to weaken the Senate's grip on the courts by transferring jury service from senators to the equestrian class, wealthy non-senatorial businessmen. And he proposed extending full citizenship to all Latin allies, a revolutionary idea that would have changed the ethnic and political character of Rome forever. The Senate struck back. They used another tribune, Marcus Livius Drusus, to outbid Gaius with even more generous promises which they never intended to keep. When Gaius ran for a third tribunate in 121 BC, the elections were marred by violence. The Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree declaring a state of emergency and giving the consuls unlimited power to protect the Republic. Consul Lucius Opimius led armed forces into the city. Gaius and thousands of his supporters were killed in street fighting on the Aventine Hill. Gaius himself, cornered, ordered his slave to kill him. His head was cut off and carried through the streets. The body was dumped in the Tiber. The Gracchian reforms were dismantled, but the idea of using popular support to challenge senatorial dominance had been planted and would grow again. After the Gracchi, power increasingly shifted from institutions to individual generals who could command the personal loyalty of their troops. The first of these new-style commanders was Gaius Marius, a new man novus homo from Arpinum who rose through sheer talent and ruthlessness. In 107 BC, during the war against the Numidian king Jugurtha, Marius was elected consul for the first of an unprecedented 7 terms. To solve the chronic manpower shortage, he opened legionary recruitment to the Capite Censi, the poorest citizens who owned almost nothing counted by head. These men had no farms to return to. They looked to their general for land, booty, and a pension. In return, they gave him fierce personal loyalty. Marius had created the first truly professional standing army in Roman history. Marius's greatest victories came against the Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutons, who threatened to overrun Italy in the late 100s BC. At the battles of Aquae Sextiae 102 BC and Vercelli 101 BC, Marius annihilated the invaders, earning the title third founder of Rome. But his success bred jealousy. The aristocratic Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who had served under Marius and claimed much of the credit for the Jugurthan victory, became his bitter rival. When Mithridates VI of Pontus attacked Roman interests in the east in 88 BC, the Senate gave Sulla the command. The tribune Publius Sulpicius Rufus, a Marius supporter, tried to transfer the command to Marius. Sulla responded with the unthinkable. He marched his army on Rome itself, the first Roman general to do so. Sulla took the city, killed Sulpicius, drove Marius into exile, and passed laws strengthening the Senate. But as soon as Sulla left for the east, Marius's supporters retook Rome. Marius returned in 87 BC, old, sick, and vengeful. He and his ally Cinna carried out a brutal purge of their enemies. Marius died in January 86 BC, just days into his 7th consulship. Sulla finally returned from the east in 83 BC, fresh from victories over Mithridates. He fought a savage civil war against the Marians 83-82 BC, captured Rome again, and this time declared himself dictator re publici constituendi dictator for the restoration of the republic with no time limit. Sulla's dictatorship was a reign of terror. He published proscription lists names of people who could be killed with impunity and whose property was confiscated. Thousands died. Enormous wealth flowed to Sulla's supporters. He doubled the size of the Senate, packed it with loyalists, weakened the tribunes, and tried to restore the old senatorial oligarchy. Sulla retired in 79 BC and died the next year. His reforms proved temporary. The genie of personal armies and civil war could not be put back in the bottle. The 70s and 60s BC were dominated by three men whose ambitions would destroy the Republic: Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey, a young protege of Sulla, had raised a private army to help Sulla in the civil war. After Sulla's death, Pompey used his military success to force the Senate to grant him extraordinary commands. He crushed the Sertorian rebels in Spain 77-72 BC, then joined Crassus in defeating Spartacus's slave revolt 71 BC. In 67-66 BC, he swept the Mediterranean clean of pirates in a 3-month campaign, then finished the war against Mithridates in the east, creating new provinces and client kingdoms. By 62 BC, Pompey was the richest and most famous man in Rome. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, had made his fortune buying up property during Sulla's proscriptions. He had commanded against Spartacus and burned with ambition to outshine Pompey. Julius Caesar, born in 100 BC into the ancient but impoverished patrician family of the Julii, was brilliant, charismatic, and deeply in debt. He climbed the ladder fast: Pontifex Maximus in 63 BC, praetor in 62 BC, propraetor in Spain in 61 BC, where he won military glory. Caesar needed money and military prestige to match Pompey and Crassus. In 60 BC, the three formed the first triumvirate, a secret, illegal alliance to dominate the state. Caesar got the consulship for 59 BC. He passed land laws for Pompey's veterans and Crassus's tax farmers, and got himself the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum for 5 years later extended to 10. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar conquered all of Gaul, modern France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands. He fought the Helvetii, Ariovistus's Germans, the Belgae, the Veneti, the Nervii, and finally Vercingetorix in the Great Siege of Alesia 52 BC. Caesar's campaigns were brutal. Hundreds of thousands killed or enslaved, entire tribes wiped out. He bridged the Rhine twice to intimidate the Germans, and invaded Britain in 55 and 54 BC more for propaganda than conquest. He wrote his famous Commentarii de Bello Gallico commentaries on the Gallic War in clear, third-person style, turning his victories into best-selling propaganda. Back in Rome, the triumvirate frayed. Crassus, seeking military glory to match his rivals, took the governorship of Syria and invaded Parthia in 53 BC. At Carrhae, the Parthian horse archers and cataphracts annihilated his army. Crassus was killed. His head was used as a prop in a Parthian play. The first triumvirate was dead. Pompey, now drifting toward the Senate who feared Caesar more than they distrusted Pompey, had his supporters pass laws designed to force Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, where he could be prosecuted for alleged crimes during his consulship. Caesar knew conviction would mean exile or death. In January 49 BC, Caesar made his choice. With one legion, the famous Legio XIII, he crossed the small Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper, and uttered the famous words according to later tradition: Alia iacta est, the die is cast. Civil war began again. Caesar moved with lightning speed, capturing Rome almost without resistance. Pompey, unprepared, evacuated to Greece with many senators. Caesar secured Spain, then chased Pompey to the Balkans. At Pharsalus 48 BC, Caesar's smaller but veteran army crushed Pompey's larger one. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered by Ptolemy XIII's courtiers hopping to win Caesar's favor. Caesar followed to Egypt. There he became embroiled in the Ptolemaic dynastic struggle. He supported Cleopatra VII, young, brilliant, and determined against her brother husband Ptolemy XIII. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers. She bore him a son, Ptolemy XV Caesar Caesarion. After winning the Alexandrian War, including the famous burning of part of the library, Caesar installed Cleopatra as sole ruler and left for the east. He returned to Rome in 46 BC after campaigns in Africa Thapsus, 46 BC in Spain Munda, 45 BC, where he defeated the last Pompeian forces. The Senate heaped honors on him: perpetual dictator, imperator, father of the country, restorer of peace. He passed sweeping reforms. He settled veterans on land, enlarged the Senate including Gauls and Spaniards, reformed the calendar, the Julian calendar of 365.25 days, with a leap year every 4 years, began massive building projects, Forum of Caesar, new basilicas, and pardoned most of his enemies. But the more honors he accepted, the more he looked like a king, something Romans had hated since Tarquinius Superbus. Rumors spread that he wanted to be Rex. On the Ides of March 44 BC, a group of about 60 senators, calling themselves liberators, struck. Led by Marcus Junius Brutus, whose family claimed descent from the Brutus who expelled the kings, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, they surrounded Caesar in the theater of Pompey during a Senate meeting. As he sat down, Tillius Cimber grabbed his toga, others stabbed. Caesar received 23 wounds. The most famous words in the story, et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus, are Shakespeare's invention. Ancient sources say Caesar either said nothing or, in Greek, kai su teknon, you too, child, to Brutus. Caesar fell dead at the foot of Pompey's statue. The liberators marched through the streets holding up bloody daggers, shouting liberty, but the people did not cheer. Chaos followed. The Republic had only days left to live. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March 44 BC did not restore the Republic as the conspirators had hoped. Instead, it plunged Rome into yet another round of vicious civil wars, the bloodiest and most decisive yet. The power vacuum was immediately filled by 3 men who would decide the fate of the Roman world. The first was Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, only 18 years old at the time of the murder. Caesar had surprised everyone by nomming this young, sickly-looking boy as his principal heir in his will, granting him the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He would later drop the Octavianus. Octavian was in Apollonia, modern Albania, completing his education when the news arrived. Against the advice of his family and friends, who urged him to stay safe, the teenager immediately sailed for Italy to claim his inheritance. The second was Marcus Antonius Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal and charismatic chief lieutenant, a brilliant but reckless cavalry commander, and now consul for 44 BC. Antony had been outside the Senate house on the day of the assassination and quickly took control of Caesar's papers, money, and many of his veterans. The third was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a lesser figure, a patrician who had been Caesar's master of horse and was now Pontifex Maximus. He commanded legions in northern Italy. In November 43 BC, these three met near Bononia, Bologna, and formed the second triumvirate, a formal alliance recognized by law unlike the secret first triumvirate. They divided the western provinces among themselves and declared their purpose: to restore the Republic by punishing Caesar's assassins. Their first act was terrifyingly ruthless. They revived Sulla's hated practice of proscription. Names were posted in the forum. Anyone on the list could be killed by anyone, and the killer received a reward. Property was confiscated. Over the next 2 years, at least 300 senators and 2,000 equites were murdered. The most famous victim was Marcus Tullius Cicero, the greatest orator and defender of the old republic. Cicero had bitterly attacked Antony in his Philippics, a series of blistering speeches. Antony demanded his name be included on the list. On 7 December 43 BC, soldiers caught Cicero near his villa at Formiae. He offered no resistance. He merely stretched out his neck to the sword. His head and hands were nailed to the rostra in the forum, the same platform from which he had so often spoken. The triumvirate then turned to the liberators. Brutus and Cassius had raised armies in the east. The decisive battle took place at Philippi in Macedonia in October 42 BC. In 2 engagements, Antony and Octavian crushed the Republican forces. Brutus and Cassius both committed suicide. The Republic died with them. Now the triumvirate controlled the Roman world, but cracks soon appeared. Lepidus was quickly sidelined after a failed power grab in 36 BC. The real rivalry was between Antony and Octavian. Mark Antony went east to reorganize the provinces. There he met Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra was brilliant, multilingual. She was the first Ptolemy to speak Egyptian and a master of political theater. Antony fell completely under her spell. They formed a political and personal partnership. Antony gave Cleopatra vast territories: Cyprus, parts of Syria, Phoenicia, and even the Roman client kingdom of Judea, acts that outraged many Romans who saw them as gifts of Roman land to a foreign queen. Octavian, meanwhile, consolidated power in the west. He defeated Sextus Pompeius, Pompey's son, who had controlled Sicily and Sardinia with a powerful pirate fleet 36 BC. He also gradually stripped Lepidus of his legions, leaving him only the meaningless title of Pontifex Maximus. Octavian presented himself as the defender of traditional Roman values against Antony's eastern corruption. The inevitable clash came in 31 BC at the Battle of Actium, off the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra assembled a large fleet and army. Octavian, advised by his close friend Marcus Agrippa, a superb admiral, built a smaller but more maneuverable fleet and trained his crews rigorously. The battle itself was chaotic. Antony's larger ships were difficult to handle. Agrippa outmaneuvered them, cutting off supplies. Cleopatra, seeing the battle turning against them, fled with her 60 ships. Antony followed. The rest of his fleet surrendered. The lovers escaped to Alexandria. When Octavian arrived in Egypt in 30 BC, resistance collapsed. Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, unwilling to be paraded in triumph in Rome, reportedly committed suicide by the bite of an asp, though some ancient writers suggest poison. Octavian, now 33, was master of the entire Roman world. He did not make the mistake of his adoptive father. He understood that Romans would never accept a king. Instead, he carefully staged a restoration of the Republic while quietly keeping supreme power in his own hands. In 27 BC, in a carefully choreographed ceremony, Octavian dramatically offered to lay down his powers and restore the Republic. The Senate, of course, begged him to stay. They showered him with honors. They gave him the title Augustus, a word suggesting reverence, dignity, and sacred authority. It had never been used for a living person before. He became Princeps' first citizen, not Rex or Dominus. He kept the title of Imperator Victorious General, held tribunician power which gave him veto and personal inviolability, controlled the most important provinces through legates who were his men, and commanded the loyalty of the legions. Augustus maintained the outward forms of the Republic: consuls, praetors, senate, assemblies, but real power rested with him. The Senate was packed with his supporters. The assemblies met rarely and rubber-stamped his wishes. The most important achievement of Augustus was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the first time in living memory, the Mediterranean world was free from large-scale war. After nearly a century of civil strife, people could travel, trade, and farm in safety. Augustus boasted in his Res Gesti Divi Augusti the deeds of the divine Augustus, inscribed on bronze tablets outside his mausoleum. I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He rebuilt the city on a grand scale. With the help of Agrippa and other loyal friends, he constructed or restored the Forum of Augustus, with the magnificent temple of Mars altar, the Arapacis Augusti altar of Augustan peace, celebrating the new era of tranquility, the Pantheon originally built by Agrippa, later rebuilt by Hadrian, the Theater of Marcellus, 2 new aqueducts, Aqua Julia and Aqua Virgo, hundreds of temples, basilicas, porticos, and public buildings. He also created the first permanent professional police force, the Vigils, or watchmen, who also fought fires, and a fire brigade. He reorganized the grain supply to prevent shortages and riots. He repaired the roads, built new ones, and established a courier system, the cursus publicus, for official communication. The army was completely reformed. Augustus created a permanent standing army of 28 legions, about 150,000 men, stationed mostly on the frontiers. Soldiers served for 25 years, were paid regular wages, and received land or money upon retirement. He established the Praetorian Guard, an elite force stationed in Rome to protect the princeps. He also created the first permanent navy, based at Misenum and Ravenna. Augustus's reign saw an extraordinary cultural flowering, often called the Augustan Age, or the Golden Age of Latin literature. Virgil Publius Virgilius Maro wrote the Aeneid, an epic poem that told the story of Aeneas, a Trojan prince who escaped the fall of Troy, journeyed to Italy, and became the legendary ancestor of the Romans. The poem was deliberately modeled on both the Iliad and the Odyssey, but its deeper purpose was to give Rome a divine destiny and to glorify Augustus as the culmination of that destiny. Horace Quintus Horatius Flaccus, a freedman's son, wrote exquisite odes, satires, and epistles. His famous line, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, reflects the patriotic tone Augustus encouraged. Livy Titus Livius wrote a massive history of Rome from its founding to his own De ab urb Candida, celebrating Roman virtues and the greatness of the Republic. Ovid Publius Ovidius Naso wrote witty and sensual love poetry, Amores, Ars Amatoria, and the mythological masterpiece Metamorphoses. But in AD 8, Augustus suddenly exiled him to the bleak Black Sea town of Tomis, possibly because of a scandal involving Augustus's daughter Julia, or because Ovid's poetry seemed to mock the new moral regime. Augustus also launched a moral and religious revival. He tried to restore traditional Roman values: marriage, family, religion, simplicity. He passed laws encouraging marriage and childbearing, especially among the upper classes, and penalizing adultery and celibacy. He personally restored many ancient temples and revived old priesthoods. Rome itself grew to perhaps 1 million inhabitants, the largest city in the Western world until the 19th century. It was fed by free or cheap grain, the annona, from Egypt and North Africa. Entertainment was lavish. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus, theatrical performances. Gladiatorial combats in temporary wooden arenas, the stone Colosseum, would come later under Vespasian, and wild beast hunts. Augustus's personal life was austere compared to later emperors. He lived modestly in a house on the Palatine Hill, ate simple food, and wore plain clothes. His third wife, Livia Drusilla, was a shrewd and powerful partner. They had no children together, so succession became a problem. His daughter Julia's sons Gaius and Lucius Caesar were groomed as heirs, but both died young AD 2 and 4. Augustus reluctantly adopted his stepson Tiberius, Livia's son, by her first marriage, and made him his heir. Augustus died on 19 August AD 14 at Nola in Campania at the age of 75. His last words, according to tradition, were, "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." He was deified by the Senate, the first Roman to become a god while still remembered as a man. With Augustus, the Republic quietly ended and the empire began. Yet he had succeeded in making the transition almost invisible. For the next 2 centuries, Rome would enjoy the longest period of peace, prosperity, and stability it had ever known, the Pax Romana. The age of Augustus set the pattern for the Principate, the system by which emperors would rule for the next 3 centuries under the polite fiction that they were merely first among equals in a restored republic. The dynasty founded by Augustus is known to history as the Julio-Claudian family, because it combined the bloodlines of Julius Caesar through adoption and the ancient patrician clan of the Claudii. For just over half a century, from 14 AD to 68 AD, 5 emperors from this family ruled Rome. Their reigns were marked by some of the most dramatic, scandalous, tragic, and occasionally brilliant episodes in Roman history. The sources that describe them, especially the historian Tacitus, the biographer Suetonius, and the later Cassius Dio, were written under later emperors and are deeply hostile, often exaggerating or inventing depravity to blacken the names of men who had become symbols of tyranny. Yet even when we allow for bias, the record of the Julio-Claudians is one of increasing instability, paranoia, and spectacular misrule, culminating in the collapse of the dynasty itself. Tiberius, 1437 AD, the reluctant emperor. When Augustus died in 14 AD, the succession was smooth on the surface but uneasy underneath. Tiberius Claudius Nero, Augustus's stepson, had been carefully prepared. He had commanded armies, held tribunician power, and was married to Augustus's daughter Julia, though unhappily. At 55, he was already an experienced general and administrator, dour, proud, and deeply suspicious by nature. Tiberius began his reign with apparent reluctance. In the Senate, he pretended to refuse power, saying he was too old and the state too great for one man. The senators, trained by now to read the script, insisted. He accepted but never forgot the pretense that he had been forced into it. At first, he ruled competently. He kept the imperial finances in excellent order, avoided unnecessary wars, and restrained provincial governors from extortion. But his personality, cold, sarcastic, secretive, made him deeply unpopular. He disliked the public gaze and the flattery of the capital. In 26 AD, he left Rome permanently for the island of Capri, a beautiful but isolated rock off the Bay of Naples. From there, he ruled through letters and intermediaries, especially the hated Praetorian prefect Sejanus. Sejanus, ambitious and ruthless, became the real power behind the throne. He concentrated the Praetorian Guard in a single camp in Rome, a dangerous innovation, eliminated rivals, and even hoped to marry into the imperial family. In 31 AD, however, Tiberius, perhaps warned by his sister-in-law Antonia, or by his own paranoia, suddenly turned on Sejanus. The prefect was arrested, dragged to the Senate, condemned, and executed. His body was torn apart by the mob. His children were strangled. His ex-wife was raped before execution. The youngest child was too small for the noose, so the executioner hanged him after first forcing him to put on the rope. After Sejanus's fall, Tiberius's reign descended into terror. Treason trials maestas multiplied. Informers delators flourished. Many senators and equites were condemned on flimsy charges of conspiracy or disrespect. The emperor's withdrawal to Capri gave rise to the most lurid rumors: wild sexual orgies, child prostitution, cruelty for pleasure. Modern historians debate how much is true, how much is exaggeration by hostile writers, but the atmosphere of fear and suspicion was very real. Tiberius died in 37 AD, aged 77, possibly murdered by smothering. The story goes that when he seemed to recover consciousness after a coma, Caligula's supporters suffocated him. His death brought relief to Rome. Few mourned him. Caligula Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, 3741 AD. Tiberius had named two heirs. His grandson Gaius, nicknamed Caligula, Little Boots, from his childhood military boots, and his own grandson Gemellus. Caligula, 24 years old, quickly eliminated Gemellus and began his reign with universal joy. He pardoned political prisoners, abolished treason trials, gave generous bonuses to the army and people, and staged magnificent games. But within months the mood changed. Caligula fell seriously ill in late 37 AD, possibly encephalitis, epilepsy, or severe depression. When he recovered or partially recovered, he was a different man, erratic, cruel, megalomaniacal. He spent money with insane extravagance, building pleasure barges on Lake Nemi with marble swimming pools and vineyards, staging mock naval battles, constructing a 3-mile pontoon bridge across the Bay of Bay just to ride over it on horseback. He declared himself a living god, demanded worship, built temples to his own divinity, and dressed as Jupiter, Apollo, or Mercury. He reportedly appointed his favorite horse, Incitatus, as a consul, probably a cruel joke to humiliate the Senate, though Suetonius reports it as serious. He humiliated senators, forced them to run for miles beside his chariot, and had people executed for trivial offenses. He murdered his cousin Gemellus, exiled or killed many others, and even joked about cutting off the head of anyone who looked too handsome. His sexual depravity was legendary. Incest with his sisters, especially Drusilla, whom he deified after her death in 38 AD, and orgies with both men and women. In 40 AD, he planned a bizarre invasion of Britain, ordering soldiers to collect seashells on the beach as spoils of the sea. The project collapsed in farce. By early 41 AD, the palace, the Senate, and the Praetorian Guard had had enough. A conspiracy formed among officers of the Guard, led by Cassius Chaerea, whom Caligula had mocked for his high-pitched voice. On 24 January 41 AD, as Caligula left the theater, the conspirators surrounded him, stabbed him repeatedly, and killed him. His wife and infant daughter were also murdered. Thus ended the 4-year reign of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Claudius 40-154 AD. After Caligula's murder, the Praetorian Guard found Tiberius Claudius Drusus Nero Germanicus, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain in the palace. They proclaimed him emperor the first time the Guard had chosen the ruler. The Senate had no choice but to accept. Claudius, 50 years old, was an unlikely emperor. He had spent his life ignored and ridiculed because he stammered badly, limped, and trembled, probably from cerebral palsy or polio in childhood. Scholars and historians now see him as one of Rome's most capable administrators. Claudius proved an energetic ruler. He personally judged lawsuits, reformed the calendar, expanded the water supply, built 2 new aqueducts, Aqua Claudia and Annio Novus, and drained the Fucine like a massive engineering project. He reorganized the imperial bureaucracy, creating a professional civil service staffed by freedmen. His influential secretaries Narcissus and Pallas became extremely wealthy and powerful. In foreign policy, Claudius achieved a major success, the conquest of Britain in 43 AD. 4 legions under Aulus Plautius landed in Kent, defeated the British tribes, and advanced as far as the Thames. Claudius himself arrived for the final triumph, entering the British capital Camulodunum Colchester in a chariot drawn by elephants. Britain became a province, though its conquest was never complete. Claudius also opened the Senate to men from the provinces, especially Gallic notables, arguing in a famous speech that Rome had always grown by incorporating new blood. He restored the ancient right of the people to attend the theater and gave generous games. But his private life was disastrous. His 4th wife, Agrippina the younger, Caligula's sister, Claudius's niece, was ambitious, ruthless, and determined to secure the throne for her son by a previous marriage. Nero. In 50 AD, she persuaded Claudius to adopt Nero, then 12, as his son, placing him ahead of Claudius's own son Britannicus. In October 54 AD, Agrippina poisoned Claudius according to tradition, with a dish of mushrooms, or perhaps poisoned mushrooms served by her own hand. Claudius died at 63. Nero, aged 16, was immediately proclaimed emperor. Nero 54-68 AD. The first 5 years of Nero's reign, 54-59 AD, under the guidance of his tutor Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, were surprisingly good. A period later called the Quinquennium Nerinus, the 5 good years of Nero. Taxes were reduced, judicial corruption curbed, and the emperor showed moderation. Then the darkness descended. In 59 AD, Nero had his mother Agrippina murdered. She had become too powerful, too interfering. After several failed attempts, including a staged boating accident, he sent assassins to her villa. She reportedly met death with grim dignity, telling them to strike her womb, the place where she had borne such a monster. Nero was passionate about art, music, poetry, and chariot racing. He performed publicly as a singer, actor, and lyra player, shocking Roman tradition, which held that such activities were fit only for slaves or foreigners. He organized the Neronia, Greek-style games with music and theater, and competed himself and always won. The Great Fire of Rome began on 19 July 64 AD and burned for 6 days, destroying much of the city. Ancient writers disagree on whether Nero started it. Tacitus says the charge was baseless and that Nero was in Antium when it began. Suetonius claims he sang and played the lyre while watching the flames. Whatever the truth, Nero acted quickly afterward. He opened his gardens to refugees, imported food, and rebuilt the city with wider streets, fire-resistant materials, and better water supply. To deflect blame, Nero accused the Christians, a small, unpopular Jewish sect, of arson. Many were arrested and executed in hideous ways, crucified, burned alive as human torches, or torn apart by wild animals in the arena. This was the first major persecution of Christians by Rome. Nero's extravagance grew. He built the Domus Aurea Golden House, a sprawling palace that covered much of central Rome, with artificial lakes, gardens, colonnades, and a colossal statue of himself over 100 feet tall as the sun god. Paranoia and cruelty increased. In 62 AD, Burrus died. Seneca retired. The new Praetorian prefect Tigellinus encouraged Nero's worst impulses. Nero murdered his first wife Octavia, Claudius's daughter, in 62 AD. Then his second wife Poppaea Sabina, whom he had loved passionately, in 65 AD, supposedly by kicking her while she was pregnant. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD, led by the senator Gaius Calpurnius Piso, tried to assassinate Nero. It failed. The reprisals were savage. Seneca was forced to commit suicide, as was the poet Lucan. Hundreds were executed. Revolts broke out in the provinces. In 66 AD, the Jewish war began in Judea. In 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Vindex, rebelled, followed by Galba in Spain. When the Praetorian Guard deserted him, Nero fled Rome. On 9 June 68 AD, abandoned by almost everyone, he stabbed himself in the throat with the help of a freedman, crying, "Qualis artifex perio, what an artist dies in me." With Nero's death at age 30, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. The year 69 AD would become the year of the four emperors, a time of civil war and chaos. The dream of a stable, hereditary monarchy had ended in blood, madness, and fire. Yet the imperial system itself survived proof that Augustus's creation was stronger than the men who ruled it. Chapter 7. The year of the four emperors and the Flavian dynasty, 69 AD 96 AD. The death of Nero in June 68 AD marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged the Roman Empire into its most chaotic period since the fall of the Republic. Without a clear successor, Nero had left no heir. The imperial throne became a prize contested by ambitious generals commanding loyal legions. The year 69 AD, forever remembered as the year of the four emperors, saw four men claim the purple in rapid, violent succession. It was a time of civil war, betrayal, and bloodshed that tested the resilience of the imperial system Augustus had created. By year's end, a new dynasty, the Flavians, would emerge to restore order. The first emperor of the year was Servius Sulpicius Galba, who had been governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, eastern Spain. In early 68 AD, as Nero's tyranny grew unbearable, Galba was proclaimed emperor by the Spanish legions and the Praetorian Guard after Nero's death in June. He entered Rome in October 68 AD as an elderly, stern, and frugal traditionalist. He was in his 70s. Galba promised to restore discipline and cut waste, but his stinginess alienated key supporters. He refused to pay the large donative bonus the Praetorians expected for their loyalty. Worse, he alienated the young nobleman Marcus Salvius Otho by refusing to name him as heir, and instead adopting a childless noble named Lucius Calpurnius Pius, Frugi Licinianus, in January 69 AD. Otho, a former ally of Nero and a man of charm and ambition, acted swiftly. On January 15, 69 AD, just months after Galba's arrival, the Praetorian Guard murdered Galba and Piso in the Forum. Their heads were paraded through the streets. The Senate, under duress, acclaimed Otho as emperor the same day. Otho's reign lasted only 3 months. Meanwhile, in the Rhine legions Germania Superior and Inferior, the troops had already rejected Galba in January 69 AD and proclaimed their own commander, Aulus Vitellius, as emperor on January 2. Vitellius, a gluttonous and indolent aristocrat, was more a figurehead for the ambitious legionary legates. His forces, led by generals like Fabius Valens and Caecina Aelianus, marched south into Italy. The decisive battle came in April 69 AD at Bedriacum near modern Cremona. Otho's troops were defeated decisively. Rather than prolong the civil war, Otho committed suicide on April 16, 69 AD, after only 95 days in power. He is remembered as one of the few emperors who chose honorable death over further bloodshed. Vitellius entered Rome in July 69 AD. His rule was marked by extravagance. He reportedly consumed enormous feasts daily and cruelty toward opponents. But his position was weak. The eastern legions in Egypt, Judea, and Syria had no love for him. On July 1, 69 AD, the legions in Egypt proclaimed Titus Flavius Vespasianus Vespasian as emperor, followed quickly by the legions in Judea, where Vespasian had been suppressing the Jewish revolt since 67 AD in Syria. The Danube legions in Pannonia and Moesia soon joined. Vespasian, a tough, practical general from humble Sabine origins, his family was equestrian, not patrician, was in his late 50s. He had served under Claudius in Britain and under Nero in Judea. His supporters moved decisively. While Vespasian secured the east and grain supply from Egypt, His son Titus and brother Domitian remained in the field. The Flavian forces, led by the capable general Marcus Antonius Primus, marched on Italy. In October 69 AD, they defeated Vitellius's army at the Second Battle of Bedriacum. Vitellius tried to abdicate, but his supporters rioted. On December 20, 69 AD, Flavian troops stormed Rome. Vitellius was dragged through the streets, tortured, and killed on December 2021. The Senate recognized Vespasian as emperor the next day. After the assassination of Domitian in September 96 AD, the Roman Empire stood at a dangerous crossroads. The Senate, relieved to be rid of a tyrant, moved quickly to prevent another military coup or civil war like the Year of the Four Emperors. They chose as emperor an elderly, childless senator of impeccable reputation, Marcus Cocceius Nerva. At 66 years old, Nerva was a compromise candidate, safe, experienced, and unlikely to inspire fear or jealousy. Nerva's short reign 96-98 AD was crucial because he introduced the principle that would define the next 80 years, adoptive succession. Realizing he had no biological heir and that hereditary rule had produced monsters like Nero and Domitian, Nerva decided the best emperor was the most capable man, not necessarily a relative. In October 97 AD, under pressure from the Praetorian Guard, who demanded a large donative, Nerva adopted the popular and highly capable general Marcus Ulpius Traianus Trajan as his son and heir. This act marked the beginning of the Five Good Emperors, a golden era of stability, prosperity, and good government that later writers, especially the historian Edward Gibbon, would idealize as the happiest time in human history. Nerva 96-98 AD, the Bridge Emperor. Nerva's 2-year reign was a delicate balancing act. He pardoned those exiled by Domitian, restored confiscated property, reduced taxes, and banned anonymous denunciations. He distributed land to poor citizens and tried to heal the wounds of Domitian's terror. But he was old, frail, and lacked military charisma. When the Praetorians mutinied in late 97 AD demanding more money, Nerva was forced to hand over the conspirators who had killed Domitian, publicly executing them himself, a humiliating spectacle. By adopting Trajan, a successful provincial governor, respected general, and man of Spanish origin born in Italica, modern Seville, Nerva ensured a smooth transition and signaled that the empire was now open to talent from the provinces. Nerva died of natural causes in January 98 AD, aged 67. The Senate deified him, and Trajan honored him with public funeral games. Trajan 90, 8117 AD, the soldier emperor and the empire at its zenith. Trajan's full name, Marcus Ulpius Traianus, was the first emperor born outside Italy, a sign of how far Rome had come. He was a soldier's soldier, tall, strong, energetic, and beloved by the legions. His reign is remembered as one of conquest, magnificent building, and paternal benevolence. Trajan immediately launched aggressive wars. In 101,102 AD and 105,106 AD, he waged 2 campaigns against the powerful Dacian kingdom modern Romania, ruled by the capable King Decebalus. Dacia was rich in gold and silver mines, strategically located north of the Danube, and a constant threat to the Danube frontier. Trajan's legions, using advanced siege techniques including the famous portable bridge over the Danube designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, crushed Dacian resistance. In 106 AD, Decebalus committed suicide rather than be captured. The province of Dacia was annexed. Its gold mines brought enormous wealth to Rome, and hundreds of thousands of Dacian captives were enslaved or resettled. To commemorate the victory, Trajan commissioned Trajan's column in Rome, completed 113 AD, a 125-foot marble column wrapped in a continuous spiral frieze of 155 scenes depicting the Dacian wars in exquisite detail. It is one of the greatest examples of Roman narrative art, functioning like a giant comic strip or newsreel carved in stone. The column still stands in Trajan's Forum, one of the most magnificent building complexes in Rome. Trajan also expanded eastward. In 113,117 AD, he launched a massive campaign against the Parthian Empire. He captured Armenia, Mesopotamia, and even briefly occupied the Parthian capital Ctesiphon near modern Baghdad. For a short time in 116 AD, the Roman Empire reached its maximum territorial extent, approximately 5 million square kilometers, almost 2 million square miles, stretching from Britain in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. The population is estimated at 60–70 million people. Trajan was not only a conqueror, he was a great builder and administrator. He completed the massive Forum of Trajan, with its libraries, basilica, and markets. He built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and harbors across the empire. He established alimenta, a welfare program that provided subsidized food and education for poor Italian children. He reformed provincial administration, curbed corruption, and promoted justice. Trajan died in August 117 AD in Selinus, Cilicia, while returning from the east, aged 63. On his deathbed, he adopted his cousin and protege Publius Aelius Hadrianus Hadrian as heir. The Senate deified Trajan, and he was long remembered as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. Hadrian 117,138 AD, the traveler emperor and cultural patron. Hadrian reigned 117,138 AD, was a very different man from Trajan. Cultured, intellectual, restless, and deeply Philhellenic lover of all things Greek, he spent more than half his reign traveling the provinces. He visited almost every corner of the empire, from Britain to Egypt, from North Africa to Asia Minor, inspecting legions, founding cities, and commissioning buildings. Hadrian's most famous military decision was to abandon Trajan's eastern conquests. He withdrew from Mesopotamia and Armenia, judging them too expensive and indefensible. This policy angered many senators and soldiers, but it proved wise. The frontiers were stabilized and overextension avoided. His most iconic project was Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. Built between 122 and 128 AD, this 73-mile stone and turf fortification ran from the Solway Firth to the Tyne, marking the northern limit of Roman control in Britain. It was manned by auxiliary units, dotted with forts and mile castles, and designed to control movement, collect tolls, and deter raids from the Pictish tribes of Caledonia, modern Scotland. Parts of the wall still stand today, a testament to Roman engineering. Hadrian was a passionate admirer of Greek culture. He wore a beard reviving the Greek style, spoke Greek fluently, wrote poetry, and styled himself a second Pericles. He rebuilt the Pantheon in Rome, originally constructed by Agrippa, destroyed by fire, turning it into the magnificent domed temple we know today, dedicated to all the gods. Its concrete dome, 43.3 meters in diameter, the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, remains one of the architectural wonders of antiquity. He founded or rebuilt cities. Aelia Capitolina on the site of Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132,135 AD, which he crushed brutally, and Antinopolis in Egypt in memory of his beloved Antinous, who drowned in the Nile in 130 AD. Hadrian's grief was so profound that he deified Antinous and established cults in his honor across the empire. Hadrian died in July 138 AD at Baiae, aged 62, after a painful illness. Before dying, he adopted Antoninus Pius as his heir, on condition that Antoninus in turn adopt two young men, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Antoninus Pius, 138,161 AD, the peaceful administrator. Antoninus Pius reigned 138,161 AD, was the least dramatic and most quietly successful of the five good emperors. A wealthy, middle-aged senator from southern Gaul, he earned the nickname Pius, dutiful for his care of his aged father-in-law Hadrian. His reign was almost completely peaceful, the longest period without major war since Augustus. Antoninus focused on justice, administration, and the welfare of the provinces. He reformed the law, protected slaves and freedmen, supported education, and maintained the alimenta program. He dealt with minor frontier disturbances in Britain, advancing the frontier north of Hadrian's Wall briefly, Mauritania and the Danube, but without major conquests. He was deeply respected for his mildness, integrity, and family life. He and his wife Faustina the Elder had 4 children, though only daughters survived. After Faustina's death, he never remarried, a rare act of fidelity for a Roman emperor. Antoninus died peacefully in March 161 AD at his villa in Latium, aged 74. He was deified, and the throne passed smoothly to his adopted sons. Marcus Aurelius, 161,180 AD, the philosopher emperor. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus reigned 161,180 AD, the last of the 5 good emperors, is remembered as the only philosopher king in Roman history. Trained in Stoic philosophy by teachers like Fronto and Rusticus, he wrote his private reflections, known today as Meditations, in Greek during military campaigns. This small book, never intended for publication, is one of the most influential works of Stoic thought, filled with reflections on duty, mortality, self-control, and acceptance of fate. Marcus's reign was anything but peaceful. From 161 AD onward, the empire faced relentless pressure on multiple fronts. The Parthian War 161,166 AD. Parthia invaded Armenia and Syria. Marcus sent his co-emperor Lucius Verus, who shared the throne with him, an unprecedented arrangement to lead the campaign. Roman forces under Avidius Cassius won decisive victories, restoring Roman prestige in the east. The Antonine Plague, probably smallpox, struck in the late 160s, killing millions, including Lucius Verus in 169 AD, and severely weakening the empire. The Marcomannic Wars 166,180 AD. Germanic tribes Marcomanni, Quadi, Iazyges crossed the Danube, threatening Italy itself. Marcus spent most of the last 14 years of his reign on the Danube frontier, living in harsh conditions at Carnuntum and Vindobona, modern Vienna. He fought hard, stabilized the frontier, and planned further conquests, but never fully defeated the tribes. Marcus's greatest tragedy was his son Commodus. Despite having many capable generals and senators, Marcus broke the adoptive tradition and named Commodus as heir. Commodus became sole emperor in 180 AD at age 18. Commodus quickly proved disastrous. He abandoned the Danube wars, made a hasty peace, and returned to Rome. Obsessed with gladiatorial combat, he fought in the arena, always winning, of course, styled himself as Hercules, renamed months and institutions after himself, and executed or exiled many senators on suspicion of disloyalty. His rule grew increasingly tyrannical and erratic. On the last day of 192 AD, Commodus was strangled in his bath by a wrestler named Narcissus, part of a palace conspiracy involving his mistress Marcia, the Praetorian prefect Letus, and the chamberlain Eclectus. His death ended the Antonine dynasty and the era of the 5 good emperors. The period 96,180 AD represents the high-water mark of the Roman Empire. Unprecedented peace, prosperity, territorial extent, cultural achievement, and administrative excellence. The system of adoptive succession worked brilliantly until it was abandoned by Marcus Aurelius. The empire would never again enjoy such a long, sustained period of good government. The age of the 5 good emperors became the standard by which later emperors were judged, and 2 often found wanting. Thus ended the year of the 4 emperors. In less than 12 months, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius had ruled and died violently, while Vespasian, backed by the Eastern and Danube legions, emerged victorious. Vespasian 69-79 AD, the practical restorer. Vespasian arrived in Rome in late 70 AD after securing the East. He proved a stark contrast to Nero's extravagance and the chaos of 69. A blunt, no-nonsense soldier with a dry sense of humor, he stabilized the empire through fiscal discipline and practical reforms. The treasury was bankrupt after Nero's spending and the civil wars. Vespasian imposed new taxes, including the infamous urine tax on public toilets. Since urine was collected for fulling cloth, he famously told his son Titus, who objected, "Money does not stink." He restored public finances, rebuilt temples, and initiated major construction projects. His greatest legacy is the Flavian Amphitheater, later called the Colosseum, begun in 72 AD on the site of Nero's Golden House Lake. This massive structure, seating 5,080,000 spectators, hosted gladiatorial combats, wild animal hunts, executions, and even mock naval battles Naumatia when flooded. It symbolized the Flavian dynasty's blend of spectacle and populism. Vespasian also strengthened the frontiers, annexed client kingdoms, and reorganized the army and provinces. He promoted capable men from the Italian municipalities and provinces, broadening the elite beyond Old Rome. Vespasian died in June 79 AD, reportedly saying on his deathbed, "Vi puto Deus fio, alas, I think I'm becoming a god," a wry joke about deification. He was deified by the Senate, and his sons Titus and Domitian succeeded him in turn. Titus 79-81 AD, the beloved emperor. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian's elder son, had already earned fame as a general. In 70 AD, while his father returned to Rome, Titus completed the siege of Jerusalem during the First Jewish-Roman War. The revolt had begun in 66 AD amid tensions between Jews and Romans, exacerbated by corrupt governors and religious zealots in Sychera. Nero sent Vespasian to crush it. After Nero's death, Vespasian left Titus in command. In spring 70 AD, Titus besieged Jerusalem with 4 legions. The city was torn by internal factions. Zealots fought moderates, starving the population. Titus built siege ramps and walls to trap the defenders. By August, the Romans breached the walls, stormed the Temple Mount, and despite Titus's alleged orders to spare it, the Second Temple was set ablaze, probably by accident or in the heat of battle. The temple was looted. Its treasures, including the menorah, were carried in triumph. The Arch of Titus in Rome, erected later by Domitian, depicts this procession. The fall of Jerusalem on the 9th of Av, the same day the First Temple fell, marked the effective end of the revolt, though Masada held out until 73-74 AD. Hundreds of thousands died from famine, fighting, and massacre. Survivors were enslaved or scattered. The victory was a propaganda triumph for the Flavians. As Emperor 79-81 AD, Titus was generous and popular. He completed the Colosseum and inaugurated it with 100 days of games. But tragedy struck in 79 AD. Mount Vesuvius erupted in August, burying Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, and other towns under ash and pumice. The eruption, described in vivid detail by Pliny the Younger, whose uncle Pliny the Elder died leading a rescue fleet, lasted about 18-20 hours. Pliny described the ash cloud as a pine tree shape, earthquakes, darkness at noon, and pyroclastic surges that killed many. Titus rushed to Campania, organized relief, funded rebuilding, and personally visited survivors. His short reign, only 26 months, was remembered fondly. He died of fever in September 81 AD at age 41, mourned as the delight of mankind. Domitian 81-96 AD, the tyrant. Titus Flavius Domitianus, Titus's younger brother, became emperor at age 29. The last Flavian ruled for 15 years, longer than his father and brother combined. His reign began promisingly. He continued public building, reformed the coinage increasing silver content, strengthened the frontiers campaigns in Germany and Britain, and expanded the empire modestly. But Domitian's personality darkened. Suspicious and authoritarian, he demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He purged the Senate of rivals, executed or exiled many senators on charges of conspiracy real or imagined, and intensified treason trials. His paranoia grew after failed revolts like the uprising of Saturninus in Germany in 89 AD. He executed family members, including his cousin Flavius Clemens, and terrorized the elite. Domitian was a prolific builder. He completed the Colosseum, restored temples, and constructed a massive palace on the Palatine Hill, the Domus Flavia and Domus Augustana. He also built the Stadium of Domitian, now Piazza Navona. His assassination came on September 18, 96 AD. A palace conspiracy, likely involving his wife Domitia Longina, rumored to have been involved, chamberlains and freedmen struck. The plotter Stephanus, pretending to have a wounded arm, concealed a dagger in bandages and stabbed Domitian in his bedroom. He fought back but was overwhelmed. Domitian died at age 44. The Senate rejoiced, declaring damnatio memoriae, erasure of his name from inscriptions. The Flavian dynasty ended, but the empire remained stable, ready for the 5 good emperors who would follow. The period 69-96 AD transformed Rome, from civil war chaos to restored stability, from grand monuments like the Colosseum to tragic losses like Jerusalem and Pompeii. The Flavians proved the imperial system could survive weak rulers and civil strife, as long as the legions and administration held firm.